All right, welcome back to class. Today we are going to be trying something new. We're going to be reviewing some verb tenses, specifically the present simple. Now, the present simple, kind of indicated by the title, is, well, it's simple, it's easy. The thing is, it is very important. I would say it's one of the more crucial verb tenses that you need to know because based on some of the rules that you learn here, you'll find it easier to learn some of the other verb tenses that English has. Now, before we start, I will be speaking everything in English, but if you have questions or doubts, please leave them in the comments. Also, YouTube should probably have the option of translating either the audio or the subtitles. I would recommend, if you do have the possibility, choose the subtitles over the audio because listening is part of the learning experience, but it's totally fine if you do need the assistance from the subtitles themselves. If you're a bit more comfortable with the language, you can just use the subtitles in English too. I think having the text to read along with what I say is helpful. Anyways, let's get started. We're going to be working with 4 different pages. This is the first one. And these pages are extracted from the book that I use with my students. So my students would be familiar with these. The book series is called English for Everyone. And this book specifically focuses on the theory behind grammar. The reason why I actually enjoy this book is because the examples are pretty simple, but more importantly, I feel it's very visual, and normally having a solid visual reference helps students remember things related to grammar. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it as well. Anyways, going back to the topic, the present simple. Here is what you would use it for, which is essentially for talking about statements, talking about facts, and talking about things that happen repeatedly. Now, these instances of repeated actions are going to be separated one from another. Because if it's one long single action, then you might be using the continuous, which we're going to talk about at a different time. So for the present simple, you're going to have 2 different scenarios. You're going to have the base verb without really needing to change anything. And you're going to have the base verb where you have to add the letter S. The way that you determine if you need to add the letter S depends on the subject of the sentence. Now, for these 2 examples, the subjects are pronouns, but you will have situations where the subject is not a pronoun, it's just a noun, and you will have to determine what kind of pronoun you would use to replace the noun in order to determine if you apply the S or not. Now, maybe that doesn't make sense to start, but we're going to go deeper into that. What you need to know for now is that sometimes the verb will have S and sometimes it won't, right? But all of the time, you're going to be using the base verb at the very least, okay? And when I mention the base verb, I just mean the verb without to, because you will see that in English, the infinitive of verbs is to plus the base verb, okay? So let's read these examples, and then I'll explain how you determine if you want the S. You might even notice by yourself while we read the examples when we use the S and when we don't. So we have, we drink coffee every morning. She drinks coffee every morning. We start work at 9 a.m. He starts work at 11 a.m. They leave work at 5 p.m. Rob leaves work at 7 p.m. So these are the scenarios, okay? And then what I really like here is this chart that kind of shows you when you want to add the s and when you don't. And as you can see, as I mentioned, it's determined by the subject. And the easy way to determine it is with the pronouns. These are the main pronouns that you're going to be focusing on. You have I, you, we, they, he, she, it. Okay? These are how they're divided. So I, you, we, they don't actually need anything to go with the verb. You can just use the base verb. While he, she, and it are the ones that need the s added onto the verb. If you don't want to memorize each of the scenarios, so there's 7 total here that you would technically need to memorize, what I always recommend is thinking of the person. And what I mean by that is in language, and I'm pretty sure this applies for just about every language, you have different person, which is first, second, and third person, depending on who you're referring to. Okay. And apart from the person, you also have the number. So is it referring to only one person or is it referring to multiple people? Okay. Now, if you categorize this by person and number, it becomes much easier because you will realize that he, she, it all belong to third person and they're also singular because they're referring to only one person, which means that the general rule for the present simple is if you have third person singular, then you add s to the verb. If you have anything else, then you don't. Because, for example, I is first person, you is second person, we and they is third person, right? They is third person because you're referring to other people, and it's also plural. So, third person singular, he, she, it, is what you're going to be focusing on when you need to add the s. And you'll see that in the examples we read, it's exactly like that. We have these that are plural, right? We and they. They don't have the s on their verb. But here we have third person singular, she and he, which do have the s on their verbs. And in the case of Rob, we have something that I mentioned at the beginning, which is you don't have the pronoun, you just have the noun. In this case, the name of a person. So in this situation, if you're unsure, you would want to replace the noun, in this case the name, with a pronoun. So for Rob, referring to a person, it can be he or she, because you're referring to only one person. So it doesn't matter if it's he or she, because in both cases, you would add the s, right? Good. So hopefully that's understood. That is the main part here. Now, moving on to the second page that you're going to see here, we're going to focus on specific rules that affect how you are going to write some of these verbs. And specifically, this is focusing on the cases where you need to add the letter S. There are exceptions, as you can call them, that can be categorized into 6 groups. And the exception depends on the letters in which the verb ends. So if your base verb ends in one of these letters or combinations of letters, then instead of adding s, right, when you're using third person singular, you're going to add es. Okay. It's just so in the writing it seems good, right? It seems proper. Just think about it like that. The pronunciation doesn't really change, right? It just sounds easier to pronounce when you have the E accompanying the S. So, for example, I go to bed, he goes to bed. I finish work, he finishes work. I watch TV, she watches TV. I cross the road, she crosses the road. I fix cars, she fixes cars. Their phones buzz all day. His phone buzzes all day. You can see one example for each of the different categories. So verbs ending in O, ending in SH, ending in CH, double S, X, and Z or Z. Okay? So this is just mostly for writing. Keep that in mind. And for the pronunciation, it'll come naturally, as I mentioned. Okay? Now, I guess I'll take this example here with their phones and his phone to kind of mention and highlight what we saw on the previous page. Here you have a pronoun, but it is slightly different than the pronouns we've seen so far, because you have their and you have his. These are a form of possessive pronouns because you're talking about the possession of whatever object is mentioned afterwards, right? In this case, phones. You can see the similarity of this pronoun with their equivalent, right? Their is the same as they, and his is the same as he, which means the rules for the verbs are the same. Their, being third person and plural, is just going to have the verb in the base form. And his, being third person but singular, has the base verb with the S, or in this case, ES, because of the specific exception or rule that we are reviewing now. Okay, let's go ahead and read through these examples. Tom does the dishes every evening. He washes the windows on Fridays. She teaches English to 6 students. He blushes when he's embarrassed. Okay? So again, do ends in an O. So in third person, does. Teach ends in CH, so it becomes teaches. Wash is SH, the same thing with blush, which is also SH. So they both add ES. Now, before we move on to the next page, there is an extra exception that is not mentioned here. It's not mentioned within the book, but it does affect, again, strictly the writing and not so much the pronunciation. And this is for verbs ending in the letter Y. Okay? Now, verbs that end in the letter Y can fall into two categories. All right? You have the first category where the previous letter is a vowel. For example, in the word say. Say ends in the letter Y, and the letter before the Y is an A, right? Say. Or you have the second category, which is the letter before the Y being a consonant. For example, in the word fly. With the word fly, it ends in Y, but the letter before it is an L, which is a consonant. The reason this is important is because in those cases, the way that you add S changes. Okay? And here's how it changes. When the letter before Y is a vowel, like in say, it just follows the same rules that we've seen so far. So you can say, she says, you just add the letter S, right? She says, he says, and it says. Okay, that's when you have a vowel before the letter Y. Now, for the verb fly, when you have a consonant before Y, when you add S, you have to change the letter Y. And you're going to be changing it to a combination of two letters, I and E. Okay? So when you say she flies, or he flies, or it flies, it's not spelt Flys. Instead, the spelling is Flies. Okay? That's an important rule to know for writing, because of course it'll affect how you write the word. But again, as you notice, it doesn't really affect the pronunciation. It's just something to keep in mind. Now let's move on to the next page. Here, we are going to focus on a special verb, I'll call it that, which is the verb be. Okay, the verb to be, which has a couple of different meanings depending on how you use it. And the reason why it's special is because it doesn't follow the rules we've seen so far. And you're going to see that this verb never follows the rules. It does what it wants, basically. And this works for present, and you'll see that it also works in the past. Okay? Now, the verb be has three different forms. Okay? It is am, are, and is. Okay? These three words, they seem very different, but they're all the same. Okay? They all refer to the verb be. The way that you determine when you want to use them is based on the subject, which is a familiar concept by now. Okay? This chart here shows you when you want to use each of the three. And again, I'm going to give you a tip which simplifies it a little bit. I is the only one that goes with am. So that's one that you just have to remember. Okay? It's just like first person goes with am. All right? Everything that is plural, so you, we, and they, goes with are. Okay? And I have to clarify here. You can be singular, okay? But it can also be plural depending on the context. Now, that doesn't matter. Whether you're using it for singular or plural, it'll always go with are. Okay? So I just group it together with we and they. So you, we, they, plural, go with are. And here's a familiar group, third person singular. So he, she, it, go with is. And a good way of remembering is that is the only form of be that has an S. And you already know that verbs in the present simple end with the letter S because of third person singular, he, she, it. So it'll be easy to associate. Now let's read these examples. I am 25 years old. So you can use the verb be to talk about age. You are a chef, so you can use the verb be to talk about professions. And then he is happy. You can use the verb be to talk about emotions. Okay? This could also be we, and it can also be they. So we are chefs, because it would be plural. They are chefs, because it would be plural. And this could also be she or it. So she is happy, it is happy. All right, good. Let's read a couple more examples. And we're also going to see contractions. I am a doctor. They are students. My grandma is 92 years old. We're late for work. He's American. Ruby's 7 years old. Okay, good. Now, here basically follows the rules we've seen so far. I goes with am, they goes with are, and my grandma, which you could replace with she, goes with is. Now for the contractions. A contraction is basically when you combine two words, okay? Sometimes more, but normally two words. You will always see an apostrophe when you have a contraction because the apostrophe shows you the letter that's missing. For these contractions, they're very easy because the letter that's missing is the first letter of the second word. So we're is the same as we are. You're missing the A, which is marked by the apostrophe, and it goes all together. He's is the same as he is. You're missing the I, which is marked by the apostrophe, and it goes all together. And you can see here, you can use it with other nouns, not just pronouns. So Ruby is a name. So if you say rubies, then in this case, again, the I is missing. It's marked by the apostrophe, okay? And it goes all together. Good. Now, for am, that's the same situation. If you combine it with I, you say I'm, and you would be missing the letter A, which is going to be marked by an apostrophe. So that's essentially how it works. Now we're going to move on to the final page. For the final page we have here, we're going to be focusing on another verb that also doesn't quite follow the rules, similar to the situation with the verb be, and that is the verb have. So have is the base form, and the rule that we saw before does apply for the base form. So I, you, we, they, all of those use have. Okay. Now, when you're using third person singular, normally what we did is add the letter S. The problem here is that we changed the word a little bit. So instead of adding the letter S, first we have to remove or take away the last two letters, which is the V and the E. So instead of having the word halves, which is with the letter S, we are left with the word has, which is the same as have, just for third person singular. Okay? That's basically it. It's much more simple than what happens with the verb be, but it is slightly different than the usual rule we follow for the present simple. Now let's read through some of the examples they provide. I have a car. The cat has a new collar. You have a sister. He has a cold. I have a painful back. Thomas has a driving lesson today. They have the same dress. Jack has a bad headache. They have a new baby. Sarah has coffee with Tom every Tuesday. Good. So, as you notice, that's the same rule that we just discussed above. When you have I, you, we, they, like in this first half, we use have. So I have, you have, they have, we have. Okay. And for everything else, so again, third person singular, you use has. So he has, you can say she has, or it has. And you can see that reflected in the examples. Thomas could be he has. Jack as well could be he has. Sarah, you could say she has. And then for the cat, you can basically use any of the three. You can say he has a new collar, she has a new collar, it has a new collar. They all apply the same rule. And that's everything for the present simple when we're talking about affirmatives, right? When we're just talking about simple statements. There's a couple things that come into play for making questions and negatives, which we're going to review in a different video. But this is the essential things that you need to know. And the way I recommend practicing is trying to write your own sentences. Think of daily situations because that's normally when you're going to use the present simple, and try writing it. I hope to see you for the next video when we finish reviewing the rest of the present simple. And good luck with your English learning experience.